Welcome to high school drama, but it's actually super important. So definitely listen up, as this video is juicy, but it also covers a serious issue in the privacy community. Also, if this video mysteriously disappears, the main developer of GrapheneOS actually threatened us legally on zero basis. So yeah, always make sure to check Odyssey and PeerTube if something is removed on the YouTube end due to false flagging of completely legal and fair content. Let's start with the basics. GrapheneOS is an Android ROM, which you can install on select Android devices. GrapheneOS doesn't ship with any ties to Google, and in fact improves on the Android security model through several points of hardening. We have reviewed this ROM in the past, recommending it to our audience. We have done an installation guide with some problems, which we'll address later in the video. We recommend it in our course Go Incognito. We recommend it in our Become Anonymous 2020 guide. We recommend it on our resources page. We recommend it to people who go through our consulting. And we even recommend it in our Calyx vs. Graphene video to try Graphene first if anyone is on the fence. This video also deserves some disclaimers before we get into it. Please hang with me. This is all important information that I need to get out of the way. First, we are making this video entirely on our own. Techlore, with zero influence from anyone. We are taking full responsibility for what's being said here. This is all on our own terms. We will be talking about many projects and people today who have been victim of harassment and toxic behavior. And again, none of them played a role in this video. Second, this video discusses the toxicity of a community and its leadership. Nothing in this video discusses technical debates, though I do make arguments at the end for how this toxic behavior can negatively leak into the technical world as well, and what it might mean for Graphene. But generally speaking, this is all related to a healthy community. All right, so this is how this video is going to work. There are several projects and people and even companies that have been affected and that I want to demonstrate. And I also want to talk about these things and show you what this looks like. So our journey is going to start with CopperheadOS. CopperheadOS used to be the company. Like GrapheneOS used to be CopperheadOS in some ways. So it used to be CopperheadOS. Daniel Micay used to work under CopperheadOS. The terms of which he worked for them seems to be unclear, and that's why there's a legal battle. But pretty much, Micay split apart from Copperhead, created Graphene, but apparently he still owns 50% of the Copperhead company for some reason. And for some reason, the other owner, who is James Donaldson, also owns 50% of the company, and he doesn't want to get rid of it. So now you have two people fighting over 50% of a company, both of which say they own the company, and the other one says they don't. Jack, the CEO of Twitter, Jack Dorsey, actually tweeted just a link to GrapheneOS, which you can see here. I liked and retweeted, no big deal. But James Donaldson, the CEO of Copperhead, responded. And over here, you're going to see strcat, who is Daniel Micay. So we're gonna establish this from the beginning. Strcat is Daniel Micay on Matrix. Here he talks about it's not normal for people to sweet talk people like this. It's disturbing that he does this all the time, calling every woman he meets dear, including a waitress. That's how he is all the time. And yeah, I guess some people want to be sweet talked by someone very openly trying to manipulate them. And that's a response to James's tweet here, saying that he's the CEO and GrapheneOS, the main developer, is being litigated. Now, one thing, Daniel Micay constantly accuses James and the Copperhead community of raiding his community. I have yet to see like undeniable proof that that's true outside people saying, yes, we are from Copperhead, which though it could be a fake person, it's hard to know like who's actually in the right here. But here's another situation where James says Copperhead doesn't raid channels or promote sock puppet accounts, and Daniel Micay says this is further evidence of underhanded attacks. The same goes for continued denials and attempts to falsely portray us as being the ones engaging this behavior. This is literally high school drama. That's what this is. But I'm just doing this to show you what we're dealing with here. Here's Daniel Micay saying he'd love to focus on advancing GrapheneOS, but he can't because he's spending too much time defending against CopperheadOS. He also says, look at Copperhead account. He wiped his account clean of past tweets. Many of these were relevant to the lawsuit. That's normally a pretty common thing. As far as I know with lawsuits, normally you don't want to be talking about the lawsuit when you're in a lawsuit, which is something Daniel Micay is just very much not doing. So I really hope that his lawyer has talked to him and he's aware of the kind of things that can happen because of that. Here's him saying he's going to make 5 Reddit posts with further evidence of the wrongdoing. Those are those. Here's him saying that Copperhead are all scammers. James is a con artist. He stole 5 Bitcoin of donations. He also included a clip of him throwing his garbage off his condo balcony, I guess. Here's Daniel Micay very personally attacking them. Here's him again. Daniel Micay archived the tweets that he deleted due to the Copperhead stuff, and honestly, none of it's very incriminating, so I don't know what his goal was there. CopperheadOS does not track users, we track licenses, and that Daniel Micay says that he actually tracks them using unique identifiers, which isn't really what he says. Again, I don't really support either of these people, but just being fair to both of them, this is very much pulling strings to make it look worse than it really is. It's very confusing because Daniel seems to want to destroy CopperheadOS and he wants everything to now be GrapheneOS, yet he still owns 50% of the Copperhead company, which to me is very weird. It's weird that James Donaldson still owns a company which belongs to someone else, and it's weird that that person doesn't want to give it up. It's like both people could just settle this overnight by just saying, screw it, I don't want anything to do with this company anymore, but neither of them are doing that. And I'd like to know why that is, but I guess I don't think I'm gonna get any answers. Pretty much, he gets in a fight with someone where he just asks him questions like, hey, it doesn't make much sense, like this story doesn't make sense, because honestly, this story doesn't make sense. Micay worked for CopperheadOS, he says he owned CopperheadOS, and if he was an employee and he wrote code for the company, it's still the company's code, right? Just because someone develops a website for Facebook doesn't mean they own the website. It's still Facebook's website. But pretty much here's the big issue. So this is a random person, and actually he's very, very nice to Micay. He's just asking him generic questions. He's being very professional. He's just asking him like what's going on. Then Micay says, it's actually incredibly embarrassing for you that you believe any of what someone so clearly dishonest and manipulative tells you to believe and say to others. How about you go and do your own research instead of licking his boots and believing the lies he peddles to you? He then says, best of luck in your efforts to support the narcissist you've fallen in love with in their efforts to scam people and profiteer from open source work that they're trying to destroy. Continue on believing the lies you're fed and not actually looking into it yourself. Your choice. And again, this person's being really respectful. There's no need for this. Okay, so I can't let that go. What the actual? You know literally nothing about me, but you managed to pull a load of straight out of your arse. More people might be inclined to listen to you if you didn't start being a petulant child when someone challenges the legalities. And Daniel says, it's laughable how full of shit you are. I can tell how little you're invested in this from many replies, and you're leaving as a good little lapdog for a scammer. What happened to going to do something else and not replying here anymore? Here's Daniel saying James should be arrested for his criminal activities, pushing him out as director of the company based on his abuse of power. Why do you care? But pretty much here he says that Copperhead owns the graphene domains. Again, it's hard to prove that that's actually what's happening here, but according to Micay, that's what happens. So again, I don't really justify what either party here is doing. I'm just kind of showing you the kind of drama we're dealing with. These are two people who are, in many ways, just acting like children. And then he says, James, cut your losses and sell me the rest of the company. You can do the same thing. That's what I don't understand. If you guys both have 50-50 control, all it takes is one person to just say, screw it, I don't want anything to do with this company anymore. And Daniel Micay can do this as well. And I really want to be clear here. I actually want an answer. I'd love to hear a respectful reply from someone related to Graphene explaining to me why Daniel Micay even still owns 50% of the shares for Copperhead. Why is he still part of something that he despises? What's in it for him? Why? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. And here's pretty much, I did want to leave here kind of James' defense as well to give you context to the other side here. He's pretty much saying here, Copperhead has the copyright to CopperheadOS code and owns the licensing rights exclusively. He says that Daniel wrote CopperheadOS under employment of Copperhead, which means he is the author, but Copperhead is the owner of the Copperhead copyright code. This is the typical setup for tech companies. That's kind of what I said earlier. Again, I think the big question here is, was Daniel Micay an employee or was he a 50-50 owner of a company? In that case, who owns the code and how does that all work with CopperheadOS? Daniel constantly says that Copperhead is slandering them, but Daniel does slandering it back at them, right? And it doesn't, yes, being right, even if Graphene is completely right, they're still slandering the other company. I do want to put that out there. Daniel is very much slandering CopperheadOS, which is ironic considering he owns 50% of the company. But, like, yes, he does slander them. He also says things that are in many ways manipulative. It's very much a two-way street here. So this is kind of what I'm talking about. So the CopperheadOS subreddit, again, is owned by Daniel Micay, which is weird, right? Like, let's just, it's weird. Okay, the CopperheadOS subreddit is owned by Daniel Micay. He also posts anti-Copperhead stuff on the Copperhead subreddit because he owns it. because he says that he owns CopperheadOS as well as GrapheneOS. But then he complains when he's in drama because he still owns 50% of the company. And it's like, dude, let it go. And here's him saying that he wants the Twitter account back as well, and that Reddit was in the right for giving them CopperheadOS after a whole year of fighting it. And now he wants Twitter to do the same thing. So what's the point of me showing you this? Well, one, I do want to give context on the Copperhead and Graphene situation, which we've never actually touched on before. That's one important thing to take away from this. This exists, know about it, and as of today, I have really no reason to recommend to you CopperheadOS. It's a paid software. It's source available, which I don't consider open source, and because of this drama, frankly, I struggle to even push people towards Graphene with all this going on, and we'll talk about that more later, but at the very least, we can agree probably that technically speaking, Graphene is a good ROM. I do want you to know this exists. I want you to know this drama exists, and this has been going on for years. I mean, I'm talking 5 years of just straight drama between these two people who don't want to let this up, and this is just kind of, this segues into everything else we're going to talk about, because everything else we're going to talk about stems from these kinds of problems. Let's move on to CalyxOS, which is another ROM which maintains the security model of Android. It also includes MicroG to have better app compatibility than GrapheneOS. Overall, I'm a huge fan of CalyxOS, and this kind of hits me pretty hard because I really respect the Calyx Institute. I really do. Like down, like from the bottom of my heart, I really respect what they do. I have a Calyx membership. I have their hotspot. This is something that I really love. And just to top it all off, I love their community and leadership. They are so nice. They're so welcoming, and you will never see fights or any nonsense happening inside of their communities. So it really pisses me off to show you what I'm about to show you. Daniel doesn't say anything about CalyxOS, and Nick is the owner of Calyx Institute, doesn't say anything about GrapheneOS. One of those things is true. There isn't any rivalry. Everyone is on normal terms. CopperheadOS is a different discussion in itself. Now that we have that established, let's look through some screenshots. Daniel Micay pings his entire Matrix room. This is kind of like Discord a little bit. So pretty much he pings everyone in the GrapheneOS room saying the Calyx developers are continuing to participate in Copperhead-like behavior, spreading personal insults, dishonest claims, and other desperate attacks on GrapheneOS. This includes participating in bullying and harassment of Graphene developers, targeted at people personally with their real-life names. People involved in that project should leave the channel. Thanks. By the way, this has absolutely no validity. I'm in the Calyx rooms. I follow the Calyx Institute. These are not the kind of people to do this. In fact, Daniel never once actually includes evidence or any kind of wrongdoing from the Calyx Institute. Okay, I just want to say this right here. Calyx is nothing but innocent, and Micay makes up this nonsense and pings everyone in his room to make them believe that there's some kind of drama. There is no drama. In fact, I'll show you the actual Calyx and Graphene drama, and you'll see exactly who's in the wrong and why this occurs. Seth Simmons is someone else we're going to talk about later, but he says the paranoia is incredible. I have seen nothing to support this ridiculous claim, so he finally speaks up, and this is awesome. And then, you know what Micay does? He says Seth Simmons is someone who has spread dishonest claims about GrapheneOS as part of supporting CopperheadOS. And we're going to talk about Seth later, and we'll talk about this and how this is completely false as well. Micay then says there is no paranoia. You can search Nick's IRC messages and see it participates daily in personal insults and bullying. And this is complete, okay? This is just not true. You can look up all of Nick's IRC messages. Nick is friendly to everybody on Matrix and the IRC network. Now, I want you to take note of this. Nick owns the Calyx Institute, and he says, this doesn't apply to other developers, but the person in charge of the project is regularly spreading misinformation and participating in bullying, and that reflects on the project. I want you to remember that because it's going to directly tie to GrapheneOS by the end of this video. Just like Micay himself says, the leader of a project reflects the project. Okay? This is very important, and I'm glad that Micay was the one to express this concern. And he pretty much just says more people are kind of fighting him on this, and he just says it doesn't excuse what they did. People who spread misinformation, dishonest attacks. He never actually says what they did because they didn't do anything. And here we go. Now Micay is going to threaten and say he's going to make posts on Twitter and Reddit about the recent escalation of attacks and misinformation, which I don't believe he ever did. He also says Techlore has repeatedly done the same, including personal attacks on me and direct harassment towards me based on me having depression. And we will talk about that later too as well, because it's complete horseshit as well. And I want you to remember when he says the leader reflects the project. Now, it wasn't just this giant PSA, right? This is the original PSA he sent. It's actually a pretty common thing. So here is a deleted message from Reddit from Micay in the CalyxOS subreddit. This community needs to drop the obsession with GrapheneOS and me. This drama isn't coming from our community, but rather yours. It's this project, including the project leadership, consistently engaged in malicious campaign of bullying and harassment directed towards me. I'm tired of the lies and fake accounts pretending to be GrapheneOS users and being told to yes, I don't want to say it. It could be triggering for someone, but this is behavior not only tolerated, but promoted and amplified by Calyx itself. Again, there's never any evidence of this happening. Someone just brings up CalyxOS, and then Micay says, please stop giving bad advice and don't discuss projects making malicious attacks. But that's kind of his goal here. It's to paint these other projects in a bad light. This person had an issue with his clipboard or his keyboard, and he said he could fix it in Calyx, but not Graphene. And then Micay just steps in saying, discussion of Calyx isn't permitted here. The developers engage in harassment and slander of our project members. The person says, what? And then Micay says, I'm starting to think you're here to concern troll. And I read this conversation. There is no indication of that whatsoever. This seems like a genuinely interested person in the project. He has Graphene. He's asking about how to fix something. And here, they encourage their users to raid our channel with concern trolling, get banned, and then post about it there to further promote themselves. It's accepted and supported by them, therefore they are part of it. Again, he never actually links to when this happens. There's nothing to debunk here. Okay, I can tell you, you can go check yourself in the Calyx room, you can look up the history of when everything about Graphene is mentioned. It's just not true. Here's another one. Calyx was supposedly collaborating with us, but instead they're focusing on causing harm and causing people to create misinformation. Someone asks, how did you reach these conclusions? Through them giving a platform to James Donaldson to spread misinformation. He doesn't ever say why, because he doesn't have any basis on most of these accusations. Yeah, someone asks, I would like specifics. And then they ask, well, where did you see this? And he just says, on a regular basis. Also tired of them gaslighting me and falsely pretending to support us. Which, I'll let you make your decision on who you think's actually being gaslit here. If you've never heard of GlassROM project, that's because no one has. He also says the GlassROM board, which includes him, also did a thorough analysis of numerous Calyx claims and has come at the decision that GlassROM will be labeling Calyx a scam. And someone even comes in and says, LOL, how's it a scam? It's a free product. And he pretty much says they rely on false marketing and again, all of this is just talk. They never include why there's false marketing. They never include what they said. They never include what they did. It's just made up crap to get people to believe this. Let's actually go over and see what happened. There was something called AOSP Alliance, which is a collaboration between ROMs like CalyxOS, GrapheneOS, and I want to say RattleSnakeOS. There might have been one or two others, but those are the four main ones that I'm aware of. This was a collaboration between them to pretty much separate work and collaborate to save each other a little bit. And also, it's a nice little alliance, right? Pretty much, the main developer for CalyxOS, cdesai, here's his GitHub account. He, out of nowhere, went on the AOSP Alliance and said toxicity is not welcome here. And he just eliminates Graphene from the list. They kicked Graphene out of AOSP Alliance, and he includes links to these free nodes. And here's what was said. And this is, let me just tell you, you can go and find these links. I'll leave them all in the description. But pretty much, it's Micay coming in here, and he's talking about how he's been wronged. And for once, someone actually defends themselves and goes in and said, no, everything you're saying is just wrong. We're doing the work. You're the one who's not doing any of this. You're making up things about us. We haven't hurt you in any way. He pretty much says that everything he says is being taken out of context and that it's not true. It's a pretty unfair accusation and is downplaying the contribution of Graphene. Just some context, this has probably been going on for weeks. This doesn't just happen now. This is the aftermath of everything that really happened. And he just says, potato, potato, Daniel. I'm tired of arguing like this with you. I've already stated that in private multiple times. This is stressful and I do not want that in my life. And this is something that I have felt having to deal with this kind of drama as well with Daniel Micay and the Graphene people. Okay, this isn't something I've wanted to deal with, and it's why it's so tough for me to even be here talking about it. It's really, it puts me on edge if you can't tell. He just keeps saying it wasn't my fault. You kicked me from my channel and the organization, and you make misleading personal attacks to me in the commit. And by the way, the commit only links to things that he said himself. And the Calyx dev finally says, dude, I have the commits in your fork. He says I can look them up. And then Micay says, that came from the Graphene community. And then he says, no, that came from me, which he's telling the truth because you can look this up and verify it yourself. He's pretty much trying to make him feel crazy. Thank you, CalyxOS Dev, for not cracking and really like holding your ground, because now Micay says, I'm highly stressed out and regularly having suicidal thoughts, which is a serious problem. And again, Micay, if you watch this video, get help. Okay, if you're being sincere about this, you should seek help. But that also doesn't excuse mistreating others. Abuse doesn't justify abuse. Also, good on him. He says this is a serious accusation. Don't take any such drastic steps and get some help. And that's the right thing to say. And now he turns it around and says, Techlore has... By the way, I have nothing to do with this conversation. I don't have anything to do with AOSP Alliance. I have nothing to do with this conversation. I'm not even in this room. I was never anything related to this. And now he brings it up and says, Techlore has directed bullying towards me, which is not true. I'll show you likely what he's referring to later. And also, I can tell you right now, I don't have time and I don't care enough to get involved with this person, okay? You can ask all of our moderators individually. You can ask anyone who's associated with Techlore. You can ask anybody to see if they can provide any kind of evidence that I've ever directed anything towards this guy. In fact, I left his communities a year ago because I couldn't handle him. Techlore has specifically tried to hurt me based on my depression, which again is not true, and we'll talk about that later. And he says, I'm sorry you feel that way, but that is something you need to figure out with him. I can't help you with that. And that's the right thing to say. I have nothing to do with this conversation. And then he just keeps on going. He says, I thought we were friends and I trusted you, and when stuff started going wrong with the Calyx community, which started with Techlore, we're being blamed for something that we have no control over. This is an internal debate between ROM developers that are apparently caused by us. The owner of Calyx finally chimes in and says, you make enemies easily. You seem to want to fight. And then Micay says, I shouldn't fight against someone who bullies me like Techlore. Micay, we've never bullied you, bro. Okay? I'm saying that right now. We have never bullied you. And I'll show you clips later in this video that you think are bullying, and they're not bullying. And I'm sure everyone else watching this video can agree with me that it's not bullying. And thank goodness Nick came in. The mystery is why you blame me and the dev for Calyx for what Techlore does or what random commenters on Reddit say, or why you came to this channel to rehash things we've been over 100 times when I blocked you and asked you to leave me alone over and over. And for the record, Micay has messaged me as well personally about many of these things as well, which he has no basis of, and he assumes that I'm responsible for what random people do on the internet. I have also had to go through this. I have also refused to respond to Micay, and I fully understand why he did that. And then Micay says Techlore is not some uninvolved third party. We are, okay? We have nothing to do with Calyx. In fact, I bought a Calyx membership. If anything, they owe me something because we made a review on our own terms. Nick actually wasn't even happy that we made a review, and I think he says that. Here, he says right here, he said he was going to do a review of CalyxOS, and I asked him not to, and then he did anyway. That is completely on our terms. We did that. We take responsibility. We have nothing to do with Calyx. Nick came on our channel to do an interview, and you can actually watch that. It's a wonderful interview, and he did that on his own terms. So this was the AOSP Alliance. It was broken. Micay spent this entire amount of time pretty much trying to find ways to be like, no, it wasn't my fault. No, it was his fault. It was their fault. And nothing was working, and he gave up. Graphene is still kicked out of AOSP Alliance. I'm still really happy to see that people actually stood up to this kind of behavior. This is completely toxic. That's something we tend to forget. Graphene itself is a community, and I want to show you what this kind of behavior means inside the Graphene community. So right here, absolutely no context. What I'm showing you is as random as it looks. Micay randomly bans Seth Simmons. We'll talk about who Seth Simmons is soon. The main developer for CalyxOS, and Nick. This is likely just due to some other disagreement somewhere, and he decided one day to just ban them from the Graphene room. This is a screenshot of one of the devs of Graphene saying, I need replies to this tweet. Use a virtual phone number service. They are free. Explain how CopperheadOS is a scam. Explain about James's nature, and I need this done ASAP. Also, swear to God, if I see one more message about how you can't create a Twitter account, I'm going to take a personal interest in escorting you out of this group. Find something else to do if you can't create a Twitter account. Twitter is not the only platform James is active on. What reason do you have to not help out on Reddit? He's pretty much telling people to respond with fake accounts. So a lot of those responses to James' tweets are actually likely fake, and from people who are actually within a high up level of the Graphene community. They are actually plotting to use this. It's important to mention this is actually clear evidence that a Graphene developer is attacking other projects with fake accounts. This is completely unacceptable. It's just, there's no defense for it. Here's someone saying they were banned and all their posts were deleted and censored by Daniel Micay on his subreddit, only for pointing out his contradictions on GNU Linux. This is a deleted Reddit post responding to someone where he pretty much says, you represented my own statements and opinions, and you've done the same with 2 other prominent security people. I'm not sure why you're claiming other people hold views, blah, blah, blah. If you don't retract your misrepresentations of other people's statements, including my own, you're going to be banned from further participation in the community. Stop wasting developer time and energy with your bullshit. Here's him pretty much filtering Reddit posts by default, because the failure of the community is to self-moderate, as if there's any kind of self-moderation that happens. That's your job as a project leader, bro. Here's him calling someone out and saying, don't keep going on and wasting any more of my time. Your uninformed rant was not welcome or helpful. Most of these are actually technical debates. He's referring to people as if they just killed his dog, but they're just technical debates with people online. Here's him saying that you're trying to pass responsibility for the failures of this community to me. And it's like, yes, you're the leader. Most faults of the community you should do some inward reflection there and see if you're responsible for any of that. Someone asked why Graphene supports so few devices. Unfortunately, their post was removed, so I don't know much more context, but it triggered Micay. He said, stop trying to spread misinformation and FUD, and stop promoting scam products from companies with completely dishonest and inaccurate marketing claims. And then he says, so maybe you should stop making uninformed claims and attacks. All you're doing is spreading misinformation and causing harm. Ignorance is not an excuse for what you're doing. It's unethical behavior and is not welcome here. Here's him saying, stop reposting my statements elsewhere without context, especially with the goal of seeking conflict with other people and projects. Someone pretty much quoted some of his issues incorrectly on the Debian security, because he's a huge critic of Debian security. The top comment says, I don't want to defend that user, but he wasn't trying to create conflict. Yeah, this is a rational person who sees that this wasn't a malicious attempt against Micay. And Micay says, they were absolutely trying to misrepresent my statements and create conflict. Kind of to derail a little bit, another problem with the Graphene community is not taking responsibility. And this kind of ties directly in with things, right? Like blaming other people for issues, telling them that they're problems, misinformation, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's also an inward thing. A lot of people say, hey, I can't use GrapheneOS because my apps don't launch. The reality is most people in our modern day world are reliant on applications. And if perhaps even one of those applications don't work, they can't use the phone. This person says some apps do not launch due to the hardening, which is a very true statement. We have a project called Plexus, which actually shows data that some apps, in fact, many apps don't work on GrapheneOS. This person is a pretty active person in the Graphene communities. They say it's on the app devs. So it's on all of the app developers, not on GrapheneOS. Again, something you're gonna see a lot of is it's their fault. We're not doing anything wrong, which is a huge criticism I have of the project as a whole, because why would I want to use a project that can't accept any kind of criticism? Here's someone who says they joined a Graphene group and talked about the speed differences with Graphene and Calyx, which do exist. We have a whole video talking about that, and Micay banned them. Here's someone asking a pretty valid question, like, what's the point of making a phone secure if it's gonna be tracked anyway? And then Micay says, your original post was rude and insulting. Don't try to tone police when you start out by questioning the work that I do for a living. Here's another discussion. Someone pretty much says, this is going to sound rude and unappreciative of the countless hours you put in, but the fact that you think hosting a platform on one of the largest social media sites is harmful demonstrates a complete lack of understanding in regards to outreach. And this has to do with having the GrapheneOS subreddit. Micay pretty much says, if you don't want to sound rude and unappreciative, then stop doing it, and don't claim that I lack understanding when you're incredibly ignorant about the project and what has been going on with this subreddit. Your uninformed opinions on this are not helpful or useful, and I didn't ask for them. You need to do a whole lot less writing and more reading. You're wasted a whole bunch of time that could have been spent on development. It's a great demonstration of what's wrong with this platform. And pretty much he just rants about Reddit for a whole chunk of time. If you want to stop and read this, it's actually pretty... It's pretty bad. Here's someone talking about the Pine phone, and it's as you could expect. Here's another Matrix chat. Someone pretty much asked a question. He said, kudos for making great OS. Bye, because he couldn't handle he couldn't handle it. And then Micay says, one less concern troll. Again, no evidence, just a normal person. Here's someone who came in. Unfortunately, the comments deleted, but it pretty much said that this person was banned, likely for nothing, and Micay says this is not an accurate portrayal of what happened or why you were banned from the subreddit. And this is the best part. The list of people that have been banned from our IRC channel, Matrix Simmons subreddit, is not long, and no one has been banned for criticizing the project. Yeah, rewind this video. You'll find lots of people who were banned for just criticizing the project and not agreeing with Micay's very polarizing opinions. Here's another one, misinformation in recent discussions. Here's someone saying that GrapheneOS will not become used by most people because of the complexity to install it, specifically the instructions. And then Micay says, take the misinformation and concern trolling elsewhere. This isn't a place to spread attacks on other operating systems. Here's someone who he accuses of spreading misinformation. Also, no evidence, he just says it. Some more. And this is pretty straightforward. I don't want to go too far into it because it's pretty much like everything else, but pretty much here, he asks for help. This person offers help, and there's a huge discussion / debate of how this person just wants to help, and they're pretty much telling him like, well, you can't help. What I really want to get across here is that this affects other people, and we'll actually cover several other people have been affected by this as well, but it also impacts the Graphene community. And these are Micay's own words, right? Again, let's go back. Micay's own words. The leader reflects the project. Micay constantly calls people trolls, that they're misinformation. Any kind of criticism towards the project is interpreted as some kind of attack on the project. People are banned for doing nothing outside of just asking questions. It is a completely toxic community. Seth Simmons is a person who really talks about Monero, and he has some good stuff. So I want to first thank Seth for making this blog post talking about community drama and to search for a privacy-respecting mobile operating system, because I've been quiet about this Graphene drama for months now. I felt like it was best to just let it sit because I thought that it would kind of take care of itself. And the reality is it's only gotten worse. And I'm really glad that Seth did this because it gave me the confidence to come out and also talk about this. He pretty much says like, hey, Copperhead is source available, it costs a lot of money, and he doesn't really say many positive things about it. However, with the GrapheneOS, he says that there's a long record of harassment and brigading of Copperhead users. And he even says, I cannot prove this is not a few rogue members of the community. He's very transparent about this kind of stuff. But his whole point is there's a lot of drama with the Graphene community. And here's a whole portion where he says GrapheneOS community members organized campaign of harassment, slander, and brigading. He says that members of the GrapheneOS community started messaging members of the Monero community directly, attempting to undermine his reputation and contributions. So Micay and people from Graphene are attacking Seth for simply speaking up. And here's also that message from a Graphene developer telling people to respond to people. So again, these are coordinated attacks from Graphene. And he even says there's negative behavior likely on the Copperhead side as well. This is just high school drama between these two people. The problem is they're throwing everyone down with it, and that does not need to be the case. Here we go. Daniel Micay says Seth works with Copperhead and has been spreading misinformation. Gosh, it's like I've said this a million times today. And Seth comes in. This is utterly false and another attack on my character and reputation. And Daniel says, no, this is not true. You're actively working with them. And then Seth says, this is false. And this just keeps going. This is the same stuff he does with us. He did it with Calyx. He does it with Copperhead. Copperhead, he does include some evidence, but even then, a lot of this stuff doesn't include evidence. He accuses everyone of harassment, misinformation. Yes, that is pretty much it. And I really like this part here from Seth, the fact that no real people have reached out on their own account, except one of your devs on Telegram, shows that your community could care less about your antics. Which I hope is the case. I hope that people in the Graphene community don't take this stuff seriously and encourage this kind of behavior. So that's a lot, but let's talk about us. And actually, I want to fully explain everything that happened on our end, so you have the context going into this. We made our original Graphene review. This was also completely on our own term. And then the last thing we did is I asked Daniel Micay in DMs to help with one thing. And it was, how can we contribute to the project? How can we tell people to contribute to the project? Pretty much at the time, Graphene it felt like they were struggling because Micay was going on every single day about how the community needed to step up and how Graphene needed help. So I wanted to ask him in our review, how do you want us to tell people to help? And he pretty much said, I don't have time to get back to this. That's what he said. And then I told him, well, if you could just send over 1 or 2 sentences, and he sent a pretty just basic answer. People should contribute, and they should support what we're doing. And it's like, okay. So to this day, that original review has the how you can contribute section. That was pretty much entirely done by myself. We made an installation guide, completely on our own terms as well. We didn't ask for help with that. I actually opted to take an, at the time, easier approach to flashing the ROM for people watching the video, because I wanted to make it as easy as possible. Some of the shortcuts I recommended lets people not being able to install the ROM successfully. So yes, we messed up. I left disclaimers to use the official guide. I made a fix-up guide, which is now delisted since I felt it was better to just send people to the official Graphene website. But to my knowledge, not a single person had actually truly bricked a device. And this video had enough positive responses from people who still appreciated seeing what the installation process looks like. I actually asked a few people if they thought I should keep it up or down, and it was pretty mixed. It's kind of a tough decision. I decided to keep it up. We've been accused of keeping the video up out of spite, which is nonsense. There are just still people who find it useful, and we've included more than enough disclaimers on its issues, and we also help people in our own communities who have issues with the video. So if you did watch that and you're trying to install things, go to our communities or go to any other normal functioning community and they'll likely be willing to help. Seriously though, it's worth mentioning that Graphene has a new web installation tool that we'll likely demo shortly in its own video if people want to see that. So that's actually mostly resolved that problem, so that's really good on Graphene to finally push out an actual installation tool. Now, another thing that happened was Graphene is constantly dealing with Copperhead. This is an ongoing issue. It's a legal battle. It's kind of unclear who's in the right or wrong, and it's just a legal battle. We're gonna see what happens once all the legal battles are over. But pretty much, Micay and Graphene are constantly asking for help and support, and he's always saying that we need to stop the misinformation about Copperhead. I actually asked Micay. I asked him in a direct message if he'd want to come onto our channel and tell his story for an interview. I would have told him it would have been uncut. He can do everything himself. He can say everything he wants to say, and we're not gonna have any influence on it. I pretty much offered him our entire platform to share his voice. He didn't respond. He left me on unread. I also offered Micay to actually be a moderator for one of his communities under a pseudonym, so it would never be Henry. It would just be some random stranger that no one would know is me. I offered this to him because at the time he was saying that they didn't have enough mods and they didn't have enough people helping manage his communities. So he was talking about how he's gonna have to shut down his communities, which I didn't want to see at the time. So I offered to do this for him, and I was also left on unread. I did all these different things to help Micay and try to be there for Micay, and he completely threw it all out the window. This is never talked about. He never mentions this. He acts like it didn't happen. It did happen, and I have the messages to back it up if it comes to that. Then we made our Calyx review. The Calyx review was very well received from our community. It's a good video. And in the review, a big talking point was how Calyx is more of a usable experience for people. MicroG enables apps to work better on Calyx, and we made a fun Young Frankenstein clip, which actually demos this. It talks about how, and it shows people being like, I just want a usable phone. And it's a meme. This is something that we make a lot of these memes on our channel from different projects, and it's actually, it's how we do things. Micay has talked about how this is poking fun at his depression problems and other mental health problems. This was never the intent. In fact, there's nothing in these videos that even mentions that. This is from a movie, and it talks about how Graphene for a lot of people just isn't a usable experience. And how, yeah, Micay built Graphene, like Frankenstein built his Frankenstein in the movie. And the last thing we did, we actually did a Graphene versus Calyx comparison video. And this talks about mostly benchmarks between the speed differences of Graphene and Calyx. It also talks about some broader advice at the end as well, which really covers, you know, like when should someone use Graphene? When should someone use Calyx? And the general takeaway from the video is, like, if you're on the fence, try Graphene first because its limitations might not even impact you, and you can use the more private and secure ROM before you even try Calyx. I really do encourage people to go watch that video. It is a long video with nothing but data. It was data that took me months to get. It's data that took just so much effort to compile, and the video was nothing but unbiased and fair to everyone involved. I tell you all these things because we have always recommended Graphene positively. We have never been malicious against the project purposefully, and I like to think we've been very responsive and proactive with the criticisms against us. So just to recap, watch our content. It speaks for itself. We have never slandered this project in any of our content. Check all of our tweets, check all of my messages I've ever sent on Discord, check our matrix messages. I want you to get all of it and put it out like I've laid out Daniel Micay's messages. And I want you to compare and contrast what they say. I also want you to take his messages and compare and contrast them with every other project that I've mentioned in this video. And then behind the scenes, again, I have offered Micay more than enough help. He refused all of it, and yet he turns around and acts like that we're out to get him. That's all I gotta say. Micay constantly accuses us of doing things. He talks about how there's a popular Windows install video telling users to use a sketchy third-party tool. And yes, I already addressed this, but pretty much we put that third-party guide up. We tried to use this tool because it's minimal ADB, which makes it easier to use ADB rather than using the proper way of doing it, which is a little bit more complex for new users. So this is an interesting one pretty much, Micay comes in and he's talking about how Copperhead has done them wrong and blah, 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 and how they need donations or else, terrible things will happen. And someone comes in and pings us, Techlore. Not sure how you guys feel about this stuff, but you could probably help to promote this. So he pretty much says he could start by not personally targeting me and presenting information on GrapheneOS in an incredibly biased way. He misrepresents it as my personal pet project, despite it having more developers and testing than CalyxOS. Again, you should watch all of our content because this is never stated anywhere. This is never stated. Similarly, he only talks about the performance cost of hardening while not mentioning any of the pricing security benefits. That's also not true. You should watch our comparison video, which directly talks about lots of those benefits. It even recommends, again, that you use Graphene first because those issues might not even impact you. He then blames us, again, for creating hostility towards Graphene and myself. There are regular raids of our channel with abuse directed towards me from people in his community, which, again, I am not aware of. I've asked our mods, I have asked different people, there's nothing that we've coordinated, and if people in our community are doing that, I do discourage you from doing that. I don't think that you should be raiding other communities, but that's also kind of out of our control. And this person responded saying, my impression from the Techlore coverage of your project was that they promoted your platform as the most secure Android OS, but that they wanted to show that the security does have some performance costs. We want our viewers, you watching, to know the actual limitations of the software you use. We're not going to tell you this is perfect, go use it, it's a perfect tool. We're actually very critical of everything. So if you're watching this and you're involved with Graphene, watch all of our other reviews. We're very critical of a lot of different things. Like if you're about to install a whole new ROM on your phone that it's gonna be with you every single day for the next 2 years, someone better tell you about the issues. And that's what we're here for. We're not backing down from criticizing things. If you don't like hearing negative things, then don't watch our content. And then he says Copperhead is aware of him and has used his content as part of their attacks on Graphene. I'm not responsible for that, dude. I don't know what to tell you. Go talk to them like you always do, okay? People don't control what other people do with what they say. Just like you can't control me making this video about your tweets. This is totally on me, and you couldn't have done anything about it. And this person says, I think Techlore is in favor of your project, and you still get good publicity from it. And it even says his video suggests your OS first, which is true, and it suggests switching if the sacrifices are too much for a use case. He obviously likes your project, so I imagine he'd be willing to clarify his positions publicly. And here we are. For you who tweeted, I have not responded to Micay because of his toxic behavior. I refuse to work with someone. I have offered him help on so many occasions, he refused it. And I'm not mad about that, but I want you to know that we have offered all the help we can. I really tried. I made PSAs when they were asking for donations. We let our community know that the project needs help. Watch our reviews telling people that Graphene needs help. We recommend it in all of our content. We just don't absolutely drool over it 24/7, therefore we're against the project. That's kind of the way I'm seeing things. And then he says his review of Calyx has a segment entirely aimed at ridiculing our work and portrayed Graphene as my pet project. He disregards that there's a whole development team behind GrapheneOS. Roll the clip.
Throw the third switch! Not the third switch! Throw it, I say! Throw it! Give my creation life!
Again, this is talking about how GrapheneOS, for many people, especially I know in real life, is just not a usable phone. It's not an option. It's not something that people I know in real life can actually use. And then this person kind of just drops it and says, I wish you the best of luck, because there's nothing there. Again, I feel we've treated this project more than fair. And I encourage people to watch all of our other videos. Here's another time where someone mentioned one of our videos. The video you're referring to misrepresents the design choices and decisions made by GrapheneOS. The person who made it has repeatedly spread in misinformation about the project and directed harassment towards the lead developer, not an accurate or neutral source of information. And again, I would ask for evidence of this because we have never done any of that. Just like Calyx hasn't done it, and just like AOSP Alliance didn't do it, and no one does this. And he's pretty much saying here, someone spent substantial time providing an explanation of which privacy and security features have performance costs and the benefits of those features. They pretended they were going to make a video presenting it that way, and then entirely left out all the work that person did. Again, this person was never transparent and told me that they were actually collaborating with me on this video. They weren't. Again, we make our own content. We can choose what we throw into the video, and I like to think that we threw in the information that was required to get the message across in that video. Watch it, people. I feel like most people get angry at us and then they watch the video and then they go, oh, wait, that's what he's mad about? Because it's true, there's really nothing in the video that's anti-graphene. And then he says this was supposed to be a step towards toning down the conflict by presenting things in a fair and neutral way. Instead, the video does the opposite and has the use personal attacks. And I want to set the record straight here. GrapheneOS, Daniel Micay, has never reached out in an attempt to actually call a peace or truce that I felt was intentional and was apologetic. I feel we have been mistreated. I feel that we've been nothing but fair towards the project. I feel we've offered as much support as I can possibly offer without sacrificing ourselves to this. And I'm very insulted that he thinks that we are actually out to get him. So again, this whole video in itself is a giant context. I want you to know who is behind this and the kind of things that they'll say and the kind of things they'll lie about and do. It's completely toxic. This is not someone you should ever take seriously. Here's another one in Matrix. It's not just outdated, but was harmful and incorrect from the beginning. He's now malicious towards the project and is more than happy to cause users to brick their devices. Here's more. He's talking about how we harass developers of GrapheneOS, which also isn't true. Here's another one saying that we have made personal attacks on him and direct harassment towards him based on having depression, which is also completely not true. In fact, the only thing I've ever publicly commented on relating to Micay's mental health is here. And I told him to get help. Here's another one. He says he's a dishonest bully who has personally targeted me and directed harassment towards me. And then Micay says anyone trying to support him will be permanently banned from the graphene communities. Same goes for supporting anyone harassing any of the other developers. Now, we're not done. There's actually other people involved. So Micay doesn't just attack people in the privacy community. This isn't just about Android ROM developers and us. Here's a collection of pictures of just random people that have triggered Micay. Micay accused Element, the Matrix client, for allowing this scam because someone pretty much pretended to be him and put a dot at the end. He calls this an exploit and that they weren't addressing and that was harming the GrapheneOS project. Here's him talking about PayPal and the fees for PayPal in India. And then he pretty much talks about how this is hurting Graphene. And then he says PayPal would freeze my entire account for months, blah, 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 PayPal. And then this person finally comes in. You know what he says? Every time I've asked you to provide evidence of spreading misinformation and coordinating attacks, you failed to provide any. There is, however, a clear set of lies from you and your supporters. Okay? And this is on the money, because as I've shown you throughout this whole video, there's almost never any evidence, and he accuses everybody of doing that. This was a really good research paper that was written covering the security differences between iOS and Android. And then Daniel Micay responds because he disagrees with it, and he says the authors aren't familiar with how it's developed and also are clearly biased against Android, which I read it, they aren't. He has beef with Signal, the secure messenger. He pretty much tried to report an issue and then Signal blocked him, likely because he was being toxic. Here's him attacking Namecheap because they didn't hand over a domain to him. So Namecheap is also anti-GrapheneOS. Here's LinkedIn. He pretty much says LinkedIn doesn't, they're malicious because they don't have blah, blah, blah. And then GoDaddy as well. If you're going to brush this off by directing me to forums that do not cover this and do not provide a way to contact you about it, I need to start what? I need to start talking about that on my timeline, and I'll use the official GrapheneOS account too. Oh, and then he says getting a lawyer involved is not exactly a diplomatic way to start things out. I intend to try getting in touch with their abuse teams. If they make that difficult, delay for too long, or don't act what's happening, I'll move on to drawing attention to what they're doing. Here's him talking about Mozilla. He talks about their holier-than-thou attitude, platitudes, and fallacies, and it's a bad look. Which is funny because they make false claims, misrepresenting criticism and suggestions, and responding with an attitude, which sounds like someone that in this video. It is a bad look, isn't it? But that's pretty much the main thing. Here's more attacks against Mozilla because he wasn't happy with how he was treated. Mozilla has spent years directing harassment towards me. Again, I don't think Mozilla really cares about anything, to be honest. Yeah, that's kind of a shot at Mozilla. I don't think Mozilla gives a crap about what you do, Daniel. Here's him getting in a fight about the Librem 5, where he also accuses them of being misleading, and it causes them to be FUD, blah, 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 misinformation, dishonesty. It's the same crap about Librem 5. Here's the Pine64, where he says that Pine64 is hostile towards graphene, and then they say, very curious how you arrived at this conclusion, because they were probably never hostile towards him. Here's him repeatedly with tech companies. Facebook, PayPal, Reddit, and Twitter have all screwed me over in ways that are similar to this. So they've all been mean to Micay as well. Here's someone else that has a personal grudge against GrapheneOS. Here's him insulting the Linux kernel. and telling them to move to more worthy projects. And actually, there's a lot more. I'm just going to quickly go through these, but this is him just being a general jerk to people. It's not specific to anything, but you can kind of pause and read all of these if you'd like. But it's pretty much him just being an absolute jerk, saying the same exact things to all these different people. He calls people ignorant. He says that they misinterpret him. He thinks that they're against them. Here's something on the Debian subreddit. There's no end to this. Again, this is probably after a couple weeks of me just looking for this stuff. Here's a technical fight that he got into with someone. The other person was more than respectful with him, and he turned it around and pretty much insulted them by the end. So this was designed to pretty much show you who Daniel Micay is. These are all things that you can find yourself. Nothing here that was shared is necessarily a private message or anything you couldn't find if you really dug hard enough for it. This is who Daniel Micay is. This is the lead developer of GrapheneOS. That is something that I think you should know. And let's go back to what Micay himself said. Leadership reflects the project. This is the leader of GrapheneOS, and this reflects the project. All right, so let's bring this video together. Daniel Micay, the lead developer of GrapheneOS, seems to have issues with everybody. He gets in fights with people, he insults them, then he gaslights them into thinking they are in the wrong, and this is his cycle of behavior. I've shown you this whole video. I hope that it speaks for itself. It's also the kind of leadership that enables his most loyal community members to partake in similar behaviors where they unleash it throughout the rest of the community and other communities as well. It's actually very likely some of these individuals that have been raiding other communities, including ours. It is completely unacceptable. It's toxic not only to the world, but to the privacy community and even to its own Graphene users. There's Graphene users who have to put up with this. I also want to say, this video isn't anything personal against Daniel Micay, which he will likely say. If Nicholas Merrill, the owner of Calyx, acted like this video would be made about him. If Edward Snowden did this video would be made about him. This is really nothing personal. If you're a public figure representing a major project that people are using and you're acting this way, you bet your ass that we are going to step in and protect our audience from it, because this goes against all of our goals, our mission statement, and frankly, it shouldn't be tolerated by anyone who values privacy. Which is actually why it kind of breaks my heart a bit to see the EFF and Edward Snowden supposedly helping support Micay with 50% of his legal fees. Them funding this is helping enable and justify this kind of toxic behavior that is damaging many other wonderful projects and people. The Graphene community leadership is not only toxic in itself, but it actually impacts other projects, companies, and even individuals. I really agree with Seth Simmons here. While Graphene may be a great project on a technical level, it's very difficult to recommend it without some massive disclaimers related to their leadership and management. As for people inside the Graphene community, please hold your leaders to higher standards. Do not tolerate this behavior. If we here at Techlore acted this way in our communities, I hope people would hold us accountable as well. And this goes for the leadership and management of any project on the internet, or especially the real world. This is just not acceptable behavior. Graphene receives an overwhelming amount of praise, much of which is well-deserved, which only makes it that much more shocking when people discover how toxic of a place it can be. So let's talk about this. Let's get it in the open, and please, please, if you're watching, hold people accountable for their actions. It can't be tolerated. I've been waiting months to get this off my chest and actually have the balls to publish it because I'm a bit scared to deal with the backlash from these select individuals. But it's published, and I want to thank you for watching this really long video. It really is what I think is best for the long run. I think this needs to be talked about. I think that this goes beyond us. This actually affects the privacy community as a whole, and no one's talking about it. So I want us to kind of step in and take responsibility and be like, no, we're not tolerating this. And I think other people should step up and do the same thing. This has been Techlore, and we are out.